All right, all right. Happy Saturday. Welcome in. Today, we are going to be breaking down some of the most recent developments that we've had over the past 24 hours in regards to what's happening with this conflict in Iran, as well as in general, the entire narrative around the petrodollar system, the US dollar dominance, and how that may be shifting and how it may seem, honestly, at this point, that the US government has been preparing very heavily for a moment like this. So, welcome in, everybody. Happy Saturday. We're going to, today, basically, I'm going to walk through just some of the updates on what's happening with this conflict, um, talk specifically about what happens here if this Strait of Hormuz is not opened. Clearly, there's a lot of attempts being made towards bringing it towards being open, but until that happens, we've potentially got a really massive problem here that people are not, in my eyes, taking seriously enough. We'll talk about Iran's challenge to the petrodollar system, something that just came out just last night. And we'll talk about what to do about all of this and how this might tie into the world of stablecoins, crypto, and even offline CBDC systems. So before we get started, I wanted everyone to know that this is actually sponsored by Caleb and Brown. I just started a partnership with them, and they are pretty much one of the only crypto brokerages that I've seen in the world where you can actually talk to a broker one on one about your decisions that you're making in crypto. So, not just get on the phone with someone when you have a support problem, but when you actually want help understanding this technology, what it means for you, and how to get involved. So just wanted to give them a quick shout out. You can go ahead and set up an account with Caleb and Brown by clicking the link in the description of this live stream. And I have a personal contact over there. His name is Jim. And you also have his email in the description of this video. So go ahead and check out calebandbrown.com and click that link in the description in particular to sign up. And so that they know that you're coming with me. If you guys sign up with this link, they will prioritize making sure that they get in touch with you and taking care of you. But if you have any questions, just reach out to Jim. His email is in the description. But otherwise, this is a really cool team of people. Like I said before, I've spent months talking to them to make sure that this was the right thing that I wanted to do. And I'm super on board with what they're doing. And I'm super happy with what they do. So check them out. Even if you have a place to buy and sell crypto, I always recommend that you have as many venues as possible, because when things start heating up and you've got all the prices going crazy, you have backups on whether or not you can even sign up for these platforms. And then if you don't KYC, if you don't give them if you don't give your like information, like your ID and all that stuff, then you won't be able to pull funds off of some of these other exchanges. And the cool thing about Caleb and Brown is that they have no withdrawal limits. So it's a really good place to have in your corner when, all these prices are going up. And I always just recommend just having accounts ready to go. So anyways, if you're interested in crypto, click that link in the description. But other than that, let's go ahead and dive into what has been developing over the past 24 hours with this war, and then what all of this means for crypto. So first things first that I wanted to dive into is that we do have the Pentagon apparently deploying around 5,000 Marines to the Middle East. So this was something that basically was the big question: is, are we going to have to send people in to on the ground, right? Predictive history professor Zhang was talking about how he made the prediction that for sure, if ground troops come into the equation, this is going to be basically what ends with this being a not very successful conflict for the United States, because you've got a huge mountainous country with a lot of people, and it would be very difficult to fight in this situation. Let me see if I can find this clip from him real quick. Yeah, so he made the prediction that the U.S. would send in ground troops. Let's quickly hear this from Professor Chang himself.
Making three predictions about this war. The first is the United States will use ground troops. And this will mean that Donald Trump will institute a national draft. Okay? That's the first prediction. Second prediction is that Israel and the United States will not use tactical nuclear weapons in this war. Number three is that the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in the Islamic world will be destroyed during this war. Okay, so last class I explained my analysis and my reasoning for.
So everyone's kind of like freaking out about Professor Zhang. Is he really some sort of an agent or whatever? I think it's kind of irrelevant. I think the point here is looking at what are the incentives? What is the potential game theory that could play out here? And this is a part of the equation. And it sounds like, as of last night, as of yesterday, the United States is going to go ahead and send in ground troops. Now, there's a couple of things about all of this that are worth paying attention to. Why would the U.S. be sending in ground troops? Why is this so important? Well, we'll get into that in just a minute when we start to look at what exactly is actually happening in this conflict. So let me move forward just a little bit to talk about what happened yesterday regarding the strikes that have been done in Iran over the past 24 hours. And one of them here is a strike that's been done on Kharg Island. And essentially, this is the place where most of Iran's oil is flowing out of. Okay, so massive amounts of oil that's flowing out through this island. I think it's about 90% of their oil that's flowing through this. And at the moment, essentially, the US has gone ahead and striked. They did a strike on the military assets that were on the island, but not the actual oil infrastructure itself, right? And so the thing about that is basically what he said, what Trump has said as he's done this is, look, I'm willing to actually go ahead and attack the actual oil infrastructure itself and mess up the entire port if you guys don't open up the Strait of Hormuz. So let's read this really quickly from the Kobesi letter. President Trump just said the U.S. has carried out the most powerful bombing raids in Middle East history on Kharg Island. This is a major escalation for oil markets, and here's why. Kharg Island has been described as the crown jewel of Iran's oil industry. It's a vital, tiny island in the northern Persian Gulf that manages around 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. The island alone handles around 2% of all global oil supply. In the lead up to the war, Iran was exporting as much as 3 million barrels of oil per day from Kharg Island. Now, just to be clear, 3 million barrels of oil per day from this one little island is a lot. I believe with the U.S. SPR, there's a limit to how much oil can actually flow through that in one day. And I believe that's around that amount, right? 4.4 million barrels per day that can flow out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Okay, period. So just as an example, this one port in Iran is responsible for about as much oil as how much can come out of the U.S.'s petroleum reserves at one time. So point to be here is that let's keep going. So, however, Trump also said he will reconsider the decision to not wipe out the oil infrastructure on the island for now. If Iran does not do anything if they do anything to interfere with the free and safe passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz, then he will go ahead and take out the actual oil infrastructure as well. So right after this happened, Iran actually went ahead and made a big move where they actually went ahead and took out an important piece of infrastructure in the UAE. So now I don't know how much damage was actually done here, but there are reports that Iran has struck the UAE's port of Fujairah, which is one of the most strategically important ports in the Middle East. Let me break down to y'all really quickly what this port is all about. So I actually was watching this video last night. It was like a 3-hour breakdown of the Middle East, the modern Middle East, and I found some very interesting information. So a couple things I want to point out. Let's find the Kharg Island first, because I think that might be a little bit more important. I think it's this one. No, because it's pretty small. So let's find that first. Okay, here we go. So this is the Kharg Island. Okay, that is Iran's island where 90% of their oil exports are coming out of. Okay, very deep inside this Persian Gulf, right over here, even close to Kuwait and whatnot. So obviously, this would have to travel. Any oil coming from here would need to travel through the Strait of Hormuz, and a lot of the oil in this region. Okay, 20% of the world's oil. 20% of the world's oil is flowing through this region. Let me back up for a second because I had somebody comment on something recently, and I was like, um, I don't think that you're understanding the problem here. 20% of the world's oil is flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. Somebody was like, it's only 20% of the world's oil. Brother, 20% of the world's oil is flowing through that one little channel. I don't know how else to try to describe that. That's not something that's a small deal. That's a very, very large amount of the world's oil. One fifth, right? Imagine one fifth of the blood that's pumping through your body is just being cut off, right? I don't think that that's something that would just be like, oh, whatever, you know. So, anyways, just wanted to kind of talk about that for a second because I think I really think people are not paying enough attention to what's happening here or not taking this seriously enough. So let me get back to what I was talking about here. You've got Kharg Island just got hit by the U.S., but it's not completely destroyed. The oil infrastructure is still there. On the other hand, we have this part of the UAE. Okay, all these countries in here: Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Kuwait, all of them, Iran, huge oil exporters. Okay, now the UAE has this very strategic piece of land. Okay, it's called Fujairah over here. And this is one of their largest, I believe, oil ports in the country. And so the reason I'm pointing this out is because, well, Iran just hit their port here. And now it's interesting because what I learned watching this documentary last night was that this land right here is Oman. Okay, so what happened was somewhere in history, I didn't really get the full story. Oman and the UAE worked out a deal where, look, um, the UAE wanted to have a port that they could access without having, right, to go through the Strait of Hormuz, without having to be dependent upon Iran, basically letting them through, right? Because if Iran, this has always been a thing, is if Iran wants to block the Strait of Hormuz, then you're going to have a major issue. So, anyways, just wanted to kind of point out that this is a piece of the equation here as well. You've got the UAE having an out. They had a way, right, to get oil from their country out into the Gulf of Oman without having to go through the Strait of Hormuz. But now Iran is attacking that infrastructure as they had promised that they would do if the U.S. continued to take out any of their um, civilian infrastructure, right? So moving forward a little bit, so Iran also warned, right, I guess, as they were doing this in general, for a lot of the residents in Dubai and near any of the ports in Dubai to go ahead and get out. So they were actually telling them ahead of time that they were going to strike. You know, countries don't basically make these kinds of warnings to the citizens of the countries unless they're ready to make a move. So let's quickly watch this clip so you can kind of see what the vibe of all of this has been so far.
Some breaking news to bring you coming to us from Reuters. This will affect people who are living in the UAE. Iran has warned residents to leave areas near various ports, the Jebel Ali port in Dubai, the Khalifa port in Abu Dhabi, and UAE's Fujairah port as well. No more information than that. That is according to Iranian news agencies. Once we know more, we will, of course, bring it to you when we can.
So, escalations all throughout the region. This is not calming down at all. Iran is saying, look, if you're in the region, get out. And lots of big issues with that there. The civilian infrastructure piece of this is a major escalation because once you go past just striking military bases and stuff like that, you start attacking the citizens. Well, that leads to countries being willing to, at the end of the day, just think about it, right? Like Professor Zhang went through like an escalation piece where he talked about how to look at whether or not you're going to get toward a nuke. What I remembered from seeing that was that the major thing that is going to happen before you get to that is chemical weapon warfare. So once you start striking the civilians, the problem with that is that, well, the civilians obviously can't really defend themselves. And it's basically just, it's one step down from using chemicals in war. Because the thing is that you are essentially, you're attacking defenseless people, and you're going to get these people now, they're going to start to get mad at you for attacking them. So what in general Iran has been trying to essentially do by going after these different places in the Middle East is try to get the rest of the Gulf countries to kind of side against them, right? They against the U.S. Excuse me. They want the Gulf Coast countries to say this is the U.S.'s fault. Why are we participating? Why are we getting hit for something that the U.S. did, right? And so this is what Iran is trying to do. So, anyways, Iran also made another threat, an evacuation order for American tech companies in West Asia. This is something that's reported. I have not verified this claim. Iran has issued threats and evacuation orders for companies such as IBM, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Cisco Systems, Palo Alto Networks, Oracle, and so on. So you guys can kind of see this here. This guy says the implications are profound, both technologically and economically. These firms are the backbone of cloud computing, networking, enterprise software, cybersecurity, and digital communications in the region. Evacuating employees and scaling down operations disrupts local services, hampers critical infrastructure, and sends shockwaves through global supply chains and investor confidence. So the truth here is that, as we've talked about on this channel over and over again, this conflict is not only a kinetic warfare between military soldiers, there's also digital infrastructure that's being attacked, and that has to be either protected or evaded, and just, essentially you have to escape and get away from this infrastructure because it's going to be hit. So what's fascinating about that is that now you have essentially private enterprises that are going to have to pay for this war. And that becomes a little bit of a problem for, once again, looking at who is this war really against, you know? So moving forward, a big piece of what people were trying to say as well is like, oh, well, don't worry about the Strait of Hormuz. We're just going to move oil through the Red Sea. Well, here's the thing. So George points out that a massive number of vessels are now heading towards Saudi Arabia's west coast to pick up crude oil, bypassing the Strait of Hormuz. So I don't know if you guys remembered during the 2020 public health crisis, there was this moment where there was this shipping container that blocked the Suez Canal, right? And the Suez Canal is that piece up at the top left over here that goes basically through Egypt and into the Mediterranean, I believe is what that is. Correct me if I'm wrong. And so this is another way, another path for, how would I say, for oil to get through the Middle East region, essentially. Okay, so the thing here is that when that happened in 2021 or whenever it was, when the Evergreen container ship got stuck, right? This was a big problem for supply chains because this is also a critical part of the world where supplies of oil and all other types of cargo can move through. And so in March 2021, it was blocked for 6 days. And this caused an extra piece of the supply chain problems that we were already kind of having at that particular time. So now this is being touted as an also alternative for how to pick up oil and get oil through the world from this Middle East region. Specifically, you have the East to West pipeline that goes across Saudi Arabia, which helps with a certain amount. It's like 3 to 4 million barrels a day, I believe, that they can get through that pipeline, which is helpful. It's supplemental, but it does not replace what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is responsible for, imagine, around 20 million barrels per day. And then we also saw overnight another important piece of this, which makes that part really important, right? So everybody's shifting all of what they can of any transport that's going through the Strait of Hormuz over to the Red Sea. Well, the Houthis just dropped a bombshell, and this is all reportedly. I don't have any verification of this one in particular yet either. But from Mario Nafal, senior officials has said that Yemen has decided to align militarily with Iran and will announce Hour Zero, which is the start of major action at the right time. Now, if you've been paying attention, the Houthis, okay, are the rebel forces that are on the other side of the Red Sea. Okay, they're on the Red Sea. So when we talk about this country, Yemen, right? Let's talk about Yemen. Where is Yemen? So you can kind of get an idea. So Yemen, right, is right here. And so you've got another one of these small strips of land here, of ocean, of a strait here that you can cut off from trade. So now, once again, you've just got another choke point that could be cut off if these Houthis get involved. And we've already seen the Houthis over the past couple of years making big things where they're attacking ships over in the Red Sea and basically trying to block the passage of any shipments through there. So this is already a big problem. This is already something that's been being discussed for quite some time. What did I say if I didn't say 0 hour? Okay. So, yeah, so this guy, he goes ahead and breaks this down fully. So he said the Houthis, Iran's proxy in Yemen, will join the war soon. Expect them to close another strategic strait, Bab el Mandeb, which means the closure of the Suez Canal. Both straits, if closed completely long enough, can tank the global economy, Iran's strategy to punish President Trump. These two major choke points are the strongest cards in the hand of the Islamic Republic. Also expect Iran to target oil infrastructure in the Gulf in retaliation to Trump's recent attack on the Iranian oil hub, Kharg Island. The United States must prepare for a prolonged war, recession, domestic, and global chaos. So, yeah, the thing about this is that, as we've said, these are two major choke points. If you cut off the entire Middle East and the oil import and export of the region, you're going to have a really big problem, right? We've already got 20% of the oil in the world offline. In oil being offline also has to do with tons of other products. And you have to think about the fact, well, for instance, Japan gets 80% of their oil from this place. So just because somebody said, once again, like only 20% of the world's oil is moving through there, brother, think about what you're saying. That's a very significant portion of the entire globe's oil. For Japan, that's 80% of their oil. If Japan doesn't have access to 80% of their oil, their entire economy and society is going to collapse, right? So just trying to kind of narrate a little bit of what's going on here. And when it comes to the Red Sea, if you cut off the Red Sea, if you cut off the other strait on the other side of Saudi Arabia, you've got a much bigger problem than what we already have. Okay, and this is already a really, really big problem. So this guy over here also highlights the different attacks that have been notable that have happened in this region already. In 2018, you had multiple Houthi attacks directed at Aramco facilities in Jizan. Okay, so that was over here in Saudi Arabia. You had 2018 various Houthi drone and rocket attacks aimed at Aramco facilities in Najran. Let's see, it's also over there in Saudi Arabia. In 2018, you had Saudi Aramco temporarily suspending shipments through that strait, the Bab el Mandeb Strait, after Houthis attacked two tankers. May 2019, 4 tankers sabotaged off the port of Fujairah, the one that we were just talking about in the UAE. And Aramco temporarily halted the east-west pipeline after drone attacks hit 2 of its pumping stations. So just in general, right, this is continuing to heat up, and all of this can come back. June 2019, explosions hit the front Altar in Kokuka courageous tankers, which are subsequently evacuated. A week later, it ran down a U.S. drone performing surveillance mission on the same vicinity, which was up here, over here. And then June 2019, a rocket hits operation headquarters of Israeli companies up here in Iraq, it seems. So in general, right, this whole region has had to deal with infrastructure attacks and trying to close off these straits in particular. So there was definitely much more recent things that have happened regarding ships being attacked going through the Red Sea as well. So just to keep an eye on this, guys, this is, I think a lot of people, once again, are just not taking this seriously enough. This is going to impact global trade in a very short order. We'll talk about what Trump has been doing to try to alleviate this, and also what Iran's response has been. Somebody said, Builder said Keith is peed off. He called him brother. Oh, man. All right. So this guy, Craig Tyndale, wrote a really good piece here talking about the systemic risk. And he breaks down a 12-order cascading analysis of a zero-flow Strait of Hormuz closure. So just imagining, right, basically the worst case scenario. He's just outlining a worst case scenario here. So don't take this as gospel, but just to kind of think through, right, what is possible here. So I'm going to kind of give you guys the notes that I had from this, and we'll just take it from the top real quick, right? The Strait of Hormuz, 20% of global oil and 20% of liquefied natural gas passing through that narrow waterway. A closure is going to trap roughly 20 million barrels of oil a day or 80 million tons of liquefied natural gas. The pipelines, okay, that east to west through Saudi Arabia, for instance, can only replace around 3 million barrels a day. And we're about to see the Red Sea potentially get choked off anyways. So obviously, the first thing that's going to happen here is you're going to have an energy supply shock and price spikes. So this is the first thing that he outlines in this piece. Just the oil piece, just the energy piece. But then that has a cascading effect. So you get an energy shock, and that leads to a chemical industry shock. Another hidden issue here is that sulfur production. Okay. Many Middle Eastern oil fields produce sour crude, which generates sulfur during refining. And if that oil over there is not being traded around, then sulfur production is going to collapse. Sulfuric acid shortages are going to emerge. And sulfuric acid is one of the most important industrial chemicals in the world. Sulfuric acid is critical for extracting metals. Without it, copper mining is going to slow down, cobalt mining slow down. You're going to see a nickel mining slow down. And these metals are all essential for electrical grids, batteries, EVs, electronics. Okay. And then you move forward. You got power grid crisis now because copper shortages slow the production of transformers, high voltage switchgear, electrical infrastructure. And these are already, right? Copper is already going through a multi-year supply bottleneck, right? We've been talking about copper here for quite some time. And when it comes to thinking about some of the things in general, right? We've already been talking about this transition from a world of abundance to a world of scarcity, and the war is going to accelerate that. Right now, the only thing that matters is physical resources and making sure that they can flow through the world. But moving forward, when you have a power grid crisis because you don't have transformers and high voltage switchgear and all of that and electrical infrastructure, you're going to have semiconductor problems. The report here is basically saying that Taiwan could face energy shortages, and because it relies heavily on liquefied natural gas imports. And if liquefied natural gas imports are disrupted, then power rationing could occur, semiconductor factories could shut down, and even brief drops in their usage of energy over there could destroy semiconductor batches completely. So this would disrupt companies like TSMC. The next thing that he moves on to say, let me go ahead and try to actually move it with it. The next thing is AI and data center slowdowns, right? So if semiconductors and power infrastructure slowdowns, and then you got data center expansion is going to pause, AI infrastructure build out stand still, and hyperscaler investments are going to freeze, right? So that's even going to pull back investment that's happening within the US, as an example. Move forward, and that's going to lead to capital markets and credit problems, right? Financial system stress. Energy importers have to buy oil in dollars at very high prices. The consequences of that are going to be currencies can crash. Foreign exchange reserves might get drained. Corporate margins are going to collapse. And you're going to have a widening of credit spreads. People are going to demand more return on their capital for locking it up for different periods of time. Moving on, you've got government intervention that might take place, right? Once all of this happens, you're going to have major problems with the economy. And so, for instance, we've gotten the government trying to stabilize markets through the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but those responses are going to be limited. The reserves are finite, and the physical infrastructure limits how fast the oil can be released. And then you've got trade system restructuring. If Hormuz remains closed long enough, shipping routes are going to just change, right? They're just going to have to physically change how they're getting stuff through the world. And that's going to increase prices a lot as well, because the whole point of the way that things are moving through the world now is that it's the most efficient way to do it. And once you get to where energy prices shoot up through the roof, well, that's going to end up with food crises, right? Food pricing crises at the very minimum. Energy shortages are going to affect agriculture because natural gas leads to fertilizer, which leads to crop yields. We've already talked about how fertilizer is not going through the Strait of Hormuz, right? Like 30% or something crazy of one of the world's fertilizers is not moving through the Strait of Hormuz. So higher fertilizer costs, right, from that, and that's going to lead to lower crop outputs and higher food prices. This is something that is not going to happen immediately. That's something that's going to take some time to play out. But any lengthening of what's happening with the Strait of Hormuz right now is going to push that into the future, but it's going to be a problem. It's not going to. Once again, you might see the Strait of Hormuz being closed for 3 months and then watch it get opened, but you'll still see the effects of what happened there later on down the line, right? So this is another piece of this that I know people are underplaying what's happening here. It's not going to happen all at once. You got to think about with agriculture, there's seasons. So if I miss an entire year's crop, right, then that might not show up today. It's going to show up in 6 months. It's going to show up in the next year, and then the prices are going to be higher. So, anyways, moving on. He says that once you get food prices going higher like that, you're going to have problems with your social society, right? So, energy and food inflation causes protests, political instability, sovereign debt crises, and so stuff to look out for as well. And then he moves on to a long-term structural shift that will happen from this. If the energy crisis lasts long enough, the world economy could reorganize around security instead of efficiency. So supply chains are going to move domestically. Countries are going to stockpile critical minerals. Trade blocks are going to be militarized. And globalization completely slows, and in reality is probably going to reverse. So this was kind of his breakdown of the different orders of effect that could come from what's happening here with the Strait of Hormuz, especially depending on how long this actually stays shut. So this is just something that I wanted to share with you guys. I thought this was a really good put together piece by Craig Tyndale. And, just once again, kind of outlining how all of this kind of intersects with other things. This isn't really just about oil. 20%, just only 20% of the world's oil. Like that changes a lot of things. So moving forward, last night we got a really important update on all of this, where apparently Iran is actually reportedly now considering letting tankers through the Strait of Hormuz if the oil on board is traded in Chinese yuan rather than the US dollar. Okay. So this is a really, really, really important change in the discussion. All right. This is a whole new thing that's going on here now. All right. Because now this is turning into a problem with the currency system. And we're going to break all of this down and how this relates to, I saw someone mentioning CBDCs, cryptocurrency, and stablecoins. So stick with me here. This is the part that you came here for. So let's quickly see what the news was saying about this last night. I won't play this whole clip, but just to see the vibe of what's going on.
All right, getting some breaking news here. A senior Iranian official tells CNN that Iran is considering to allow a limited number of oil tankers to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, provided that the oil cargo is traded in Chinese yuan. All right, this is the breaking piece of...
So, listen, this is where it starts to, the narrative here is going to start to shift, right? This is going to be, are we really talking about just an issue here with like nuclear enrichment? Is this really just a problem about, I kind of forget what the actual point of the US being involved in this conflict is anymore, but I believe that was the number one thing, right? Was the nuclear enrichment. So let's talk about this, right? Like, what is this really about for a second? So we've had a moment where last year in the summer, the U.S. carried out Project Midnight Hammer, where they dropped these carpet bombs or these bunker bombs over Iran's nuclear facilities, completely wiping them out, apparently, right? Completely setting them back years and years and years. Well, what we've continued to kind of learn is that potentially when they did that, they didn't get all of their enriched uranium. In fact, it kind of just dispersed, right? And so the enriched uranium that they would need to be able to create a nuclear weapon was kind of taken from the site and actually dispersed to different parts of the country. And so there's a certain amount of the enriched uranium that the U.S. might not have eyes on, is what the story is starting to become at this point. So if the U.S. is worried about the enriched uranium that Iran has, right? Okay, let me back up, right? Let's talk about power for a second. So ever since World War II, right? Ever since countries started to actually develop legitimate nuclear bombs, it changed the entire dynamic of who gets to make what decisions. So I haven't, I'm not a history major. I'm not someone who spent a ton of time looking at all of this, but it started to really click with me more recently, right? The importance of having these nuclear weapons. What happens when a country has a nuclear weapon is that no one can really tell them what to do anymore. You can't really fully bully them, and you definitely can't come in and take their leader out. Okay, because once a country has a nuclear weapon and you try to take out their leader, you basically you could have just started a nuclear fallout, right? Because Yeah, it's like imagine you're let's bring it to like real people stuff, right? If we're imagine there's people in jail and somebody's got a knife, but somebody made a makeshift gun, right? Like you might be able to duke it out and like have a fight with the guy that has a knife, right? But if a guy's got something that's long distance that he can hit you and knock you out with, like you're not really going to be able to you're not going to mess with that guy. It's just not worth messing with him. You're not even going to try. You're just going to stay back. You're going to use whatever economic weapons that you can use, but you're not going to actually pull up on this guy and actually try to take him out because he will have the potential to end you and to end the whole world is the problem with the nukes, right? So North Korea, right? What happened with the US and North Korea is that like the US was like, they cut a deal with them where they're like, yeah, guys, like just don't develop nuclear weapons and we won't sanction you or whatever. I don't know the whole history around it, but just imagine, right? The US is like, well, we won't cut you guys off from global trade, or we won't do what we can to cut you off from global trade if you promise to not build a nuclear weapon. But what they did was North Korea said, cool, we won't. But then they did it anyways. They built a nuclear weapon. And so all of a sudden now you got another country that has nuclear weapons that basically gets to stand their ground. Like none of the countries that have nuclear weapons are ever basically going to be taken over. They've solidified their place in history as a place that you can't mess with anymore. So it's I think there's 9 nuclear powers. Let me see. You have China, the US, Russia, the United Kingdom, France, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. So think about that, right? There's only a few countries that legitimately actually have nuclear weapons and that therefore basically cannot be messed with. You can't ever encroach. You can encroach maybe on some of their border, but you basically won't be able to take any land away from them, and you definitely won't be able to get rid of the state of the country once they have a nuclear weapon because you just won't play that game. It's not worth playing the game, right? And so what the US has tried to do is try to make sure that, well, in general, no one who's in the club wants anyone else in the club, right? So they're like, look, we will do whatever we can in our own regions, right, to prevent people from wanting to build their own nukes. And that way, if you've got a nuke, you've got power over that entire region, essentially, right? And the only people that can stand up to you is whoever's the closest guy that's got a nuke, or who has a base closest to you that has a nuke as well. So, anyways, just a little piece of the power game to keep in mind here, because what happened here with Iran is that the US wanted to make sure that Iran never had a nuclear weapon. Now, there's more history as to why that mattered so much. Obviously in the Middle Eastern region, there's a whole lot of conflict that has happened throughout all of the years. And I'm by far not an expert in any of that. But I just wanted to kind of point some of this out because to me, even just for me personally, it started to hit and really like for me to understand some of the North Korea situation, it started to hit for me around why the U.S. has been so adamant about Iran not having a nuclear weapon and willing to do things like Operation Midnight Hammer to prevent it from happening, right? Because once again, there was a back and forth between the Obama, first Trump, and Biden presidencies where the U.S. had a deal with Iran where, once again, we would relax our sanctions on them the same way that the US did with North Korea to allow them to prevent them from, like, basically they said, okay, Iran said, hey, I won't develop a nuclear weapon as long as you don't sanction me, type of a thing. And there was some deals in between there where the US did that. And then I believe Trump withdrew from that agreement and said, no, actually, we're just going to sanction you because just like with North Korea, you guys might be doing it anyways. And so that's kind of like some of the game that's been played here. I believe sanctions are back on, right, and trying to keep them from even having the money, right, to be able to do all of that, to be able to build nuclear weapons. And then, they're clearly making progress. And then Trump tries to do Operation Midnight Hammer to take them out of that. And maybe it did set them back in some time, but it didn't fully prevent them from being able to build a nuclear weapon. And then so now here we are, where potentially that's supposedly the reason why the US is going in after Iran is to prevent them from having a nuclear weapon. But the problem is that, once again, the enriched uranium that you would need to build a nuclear weapon might be dispersed throughout this entire country, and you would have nowhere to target as a way to take it out. And so this is why the ground troops is such an interesting concept, because if you're going to actually do anything here, you're going to have to send people on the ground to like go and search this entire country. And you're not going to be able to search the entire country. Iran is a massive country. Okay. So you can't just like, search every single corner. Imagine for the United States, it's probably not that much smaller than the United States. You're going to, go through every single building in the United States. No chance you're going to do that. So, anyways, point being was, what is this really about? Well, there's another thing that's been happening over the past little bit of time. So, a piece of the story around I set up the whole nuclear situation as well is that in the past, the US, when people try to go against the US dollar system, and I see your super chat here, Canadian. I'll get to that in just a moment. This is Canadian eh. Cool name. When the US has had the threat of a country or a group of countries trying to come together against them to create a new currency system, they'll usually just take that person out. Okay, I'm pretty sure that's kind of what happened with Gaddafi, for instance. And there's other examples of that. And once again, I'm not a history guy, just kind of understanding, right, from a fables perspective, right, of kind of how the US moves. When you have a nuclear weapon, it's much harder to do that. It's much harder to say, once again, you're not going to just take a leader out in that situation. So now we're moving into a world where there are countries that have nuclear weapons that are kind of saying, hey, we're going to kind of come together and stop using the US dollar system. And so this becomes the massive concern. Now, in particular, technically, it's only Russia and China and India, just kidding, that all have these nuclear weapons. And so we all know about BRICS, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. So three of those, and obviously there's others that are kind of joining in the coalition as well, smaller countries in particular, I think like Indonesia, I think Saudi Arabia, stuff like that. They're coming together to say, hey, we want to find a way to trade outside of the US dollar. And so what has been Trump's response to that? Or he brought it up last year at the beginning of the year. He said, look, if you guys try to go around the US dollar, that's fine. Guess what? I'm just going to hit you with tariffs. That becomes his weapon of choice because he knows he can't just come in and do a regime change. He knows he can't just come in and take your leader out. So he's going to try to use the tariffs as an economic weapon to disincentivize you from trying to do it. So as we continue to move forward here, right, like I said, Iran just came out last night and said, well, if you're moving through the Strait of Hormuz and you're trading in Yuan, if the oil was traded in Yuan, then everything is cool. Everything is cool. Now, Jim Bianco, a very popular macroeconomic analyst, had some thoughts on this. And I thought that this was definitely worth sharing because although that sounds like such a massive threat, it sounds like, oh my goodness, they're about to switch the currency system. They're going to use the digital or the Yuan, rather just the Yuan period to trade in US oil or to trade oil, excuse me. Well, let's do a couple of things. First, let's talk about the petrodollar because I want to make sure that we fully understand how the petrodollar system kind of came about and why would that even be in question? Why would anyone be trading in US dollars in the first place? You've got all of these countries in the Middle East, they all have their own currencies. Why are they trading US dollars when it comes to their oil? Why are they selling their oil for US dollars? Why wouldn't they sell their oil for their own currency or whatever? So let's talk about that real quick. This is Morgan Creek Digital, the guy, Mark Yusko, talking about this. You guys can't hear that? Oh, I'm tripping major, y'all. Dang, bruh. All right, give me just a second because this is some fire. I'm sitting here. I'm vibing out. Oof. All right, hold on. Dude. Oh, because it says it's not sharing. All right, here we go, guys. Psh, my apologies.
Or token 24. The dynamics at play of the petrodollar and kind of what is now happening in the Middle East is very interesting to think about when it comes to the Gulf countries, and particularly how this is linked with Bitcoin, because it's very interesting. I don't know what's going to happen in Dubai for Token 2049, one of the big crypto conferences, but certainly Eric Trump, Don Trump Jr. have been at that one, have made some huge headlines out there. But it is interesting to think about how some of the dynamics at play, particularly in the Gulf countries and what that means, at a time when a lot of those countries also have been very friendly towards Trump and what he's trying to do with World Liberty Financial and crypto colliding with all this. I mean, it's very interesting to think about all these
interconnected. Look, it all goes back to 1971, and, we cut a deal with Saudi Arabia and we closed the gold window. Nixon said, all right, gold window is now shut. We go off the gold standard. Well, if we're not backing the dollar with gold, what are we going to back it with? Oil. How do we do that? We don't have very much oil. We had some, but we didn't have a lot back then because we hadn't really invented fracking yet. And so he said, all right, here's the deal. You price all global currency, all global oil transactions in our currency, the dollar, the petrodollar, and we will protect you at all costs, right? No matter what happens, we'll be there. We'll invade other countries. We will protect you. You can beat up on us. You can, do bad things, but it doesn't matter as long as you protect our oil. And the interesting thing is anyone who threatened that hegemony, whether it was Libya or whether it was Iraq, we took those guys out, right? They wanted to price in gold or price in euros. We're like, nope, it has to be priced in dollars. Well, that hegemony started to slip a couple, 5-8 years ago when China and Russia started pricing oil transactions in renminbi and rubles. Now, it's one thing if Libya threatens to price in gold because they don't have nuclear weapons, so we can take them out. We can't take out China and Russia. So that's just going to change. And so that did change. And so the dependence of global oil markets on the dollar shrunk. Well, that's a problem for the dollar. It's a problem when countries like China and Russia start selling the treasuries that they used to buy to fund this big petrodollar recycling plan. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, now what? Well, guess what? You create Tether and stablecoins, and you back them with treasuries. It's a really interesting play. So now Tether has become, I think, the 7th largest owner of treasuries in the world at a time when China, Russia, and everybody else is dumping the treasuries. It's a very interesting development.
So thank you for sticking with me through that technical issue there. But so here we are, right? Now the US has been trying to find a way around the fact that they can't just bully Russia, China, India in particular into using the US dollar. They can't do that. They can't just take out the leader and say, no, that plan's not going to happen anymore. And if you do that, I'm just going to take you out. No. These are countries with big boy weapons. Okay. So with that, right, if they want to go ahead and go around the US dollar system, then the US needs to find a way to compete, a way to actually be competitive on the global stage. And I'm just going to be honest, I think that we might be coming into the moment where that needs to happen. Let's keep in mind that ever since Trump has been in office, what was one of the first things that he said? What was one of the things that he campaigned on? He campaigned on this idea of making America the crypto capital of the world, right? And so immediately, what do? They rush to get stablecoin legislation in place. It's one of the first moves that they actually made. Not only did the U.S. Government, the executive branch, do what they could to make this happen. But they even got Congress to push together and come together to create this Genius Act stablecoin legislation, which creates what kind of an implication for the US dollar. They said that the US backed stablecoins must be backed 1-to-1 with US short term treasuries. Okay, whoa, wait a minute. Any stablecoin that is a US dollar stablecoin that's based in the US must be backed 1-to-1 with US treasuries. Now, that's an interesting move to make. Obviously, in general, if you're going to have a stablecoin, you'd want it to be backed, you'd want it to be solid. But there's plenty of different ways that you could have short-term instruments, right, that back that money. But they said short-term US treasuries. So that's a couple of reasons why that's important. One of them is because the US needs to refinance $9 trillion worth of debt even just this year alone. Okay, a bunch of debt that they've borrowed is coming due, and they need to refinance that debt. What the US has been doing is continuously refinancing that debt in short-term markets because they know that the long-term yields are too high at the moment. So if they try to refinance into the long term, then they're going to have to pay even higher interest rates on the debt that the US already owes. So while the US tries to get the long-term interest rates to come down, they're borrowing all of the money that they can in the short-term markets. Well, the thing about that is that when you obviously have a huge demand for borrowing in short-term markets, well, the yields on that are going to continue to go up. And so these stablecoins are an answer to that problem at the very least. Okay, if we can get people to use stablecoins, then we can lower our short-term borrowing costs. That's one piece of the equation. Now, the other piece of the equation here is how can we use stablecoins to increase and maintain US dollar hegemony around the world, right? So the thing that we've talked about on this channel is that when you have these stablecoins, there's a thing about this, right? Because the people of Iran right now, they are looking for ways to protect themselves financially from what's going on. Okay, so they don't really care about what the Iranian government's objectives are regarding the US dollar. Okay, if these people in Iran want to make sure that they can protect their money, they're going to try to get their hands on dollars. But the Iranian government might say, no, you cannot have access to any US dollars. They would probably have troubles getting their hands on US dollars in any sort of a way. But if the Iranian people can get their hands on any form of digital currency, then they can swap that for stablecoins. And if they can swap it for stablecoins, then they can have a stable value of their dollar, of their wealth, of their money that they have in US dollars. Because what happened? Why were these people out in the streets protesting not too long ago? Well, partially because their currency was collapsing. The value of their currency was completely collapsing. Well, what would be a good alternative to having a collapsing currency? Well, it'd be to have your hands on either a Bitcoin or any sort of a crypto that might have at least some stability versus that, or even having stablecoins. So you might have a country or the government that says, no, we don't want US dollars, but the citizens themselves might actually want them, right? Because they're more worried about the hyperinflation of their currency than they are about whatever the government's objectives are. So that's one piece of this to keep in mind. Now, the other piece, and because also, right, these stablecoins are a technologically superior version of dollars, right? Because now, once again, I can send these dollars across borders. I can send them at the speed of light, essentially, and at super low costs compared to trying to get a bank account at some bank that's going to allow me to then have access to these US dollars. So the stablecoins provide a few different things, right? You get the permissionless aspect of them. Once I get my hands on them, you can't really stop me from using them. Obviously, you can have the treasury can like put a sanction on the company and keep them from allowing people to use it for sure. But from the perspective of if this is what the US wants, right, then these citizens of these countries can get access to these dollars, these essentially dollars, or even essentially US treasuries in a permissionless manner. No one can stop them from that. The other thing is that now you've got a technologically superior offering because you can send this money anywhere in the world for pennies on the dollar. So that's the one piece, right? It's just the retail use of these stablecoins. But then you move into this idea of, well, you also had Iran not too long ago actually using stablecoins, Tether in particular, as a way to get around the US sanctions. Okay. So this was a fascinating thing, right? And it's funny because there's like all these headlines coming out about this right now as well. Let me see if I can find a little piece about that real quick. So Iran has actually been using stablecoins over time as a way to get around US sanctions. So, in particular, Tether. So let me share this with you guys really quickly. And this has been happening, honestly, for quite some time. There's a couple of articles. I don't know how I lost them so fast. Yeah, okay. Iran's central bank bought $507 million of USDT to underpin the rial, a report found. So Elliptic, which is one of these people that I guess traced all of these transactions, traced more than $500 million in USDT tied to Iran's central bank, suggesting the stablecoin was used to manage foreign exchange pressures and build a sanctions-proof alternative to dollar banking. Now, obviously, that's kind of confusing, right? Because it's like, well, wouldn't Tether just be an alternative to the US dollar? Well, technically, or wouldn't Tether just bolster the US dollar is the real question, right? Because if Tether has to be back one-to-one with US treasuries, then using this Tether to get around US sanctions might not actually work. And that's a reality of the situation. This is why the Genius Act needed to be passed. This is why the Genius Act was so important. Because what happened was the US was trying to prevent this from being able to be possible. And so Tether, right? What did Tether do when the Genius Act passed? They set up their US version of Tether because they knew that this version of Tether that Iran is using to avoid sanctions is not compliant. Okay. And so the US would try to come in and shut them down or basically prevent them from being able to get access to US treasuries. And none of these stablecoin issues can really thrive, not the custodial ones, not the centralized ones, without having access to US treasuries. There's only one market that you can go to place such large amounts of money. If you're talking about tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, there's only one treasury market that's stable enough for one, and that actually has the liquidity for you to be able to come in and make those kinds of purchases, and that's the US treasury market. So really, no stablecoin can really function without the US treasury market. And if the US decides to put a sanction on you because you're not following their rules, then your stablecoin goes kaput, right? So there's a couple of things there to kind of just keep in mind as you're thinking about, okay, well, why would Iran want to use USDT to do this? Well, USDT, the broader USDT, yes, it is backed with a certain amount of US treasuries. They also have bought a lot of gold over the past couple of years. They've become a very large buyer of gold compared to the levels of central bankers, same way that they are with the US treasuries as well. And they've also had a certain amount of Bitcoin that they've used to back this as well. Now, another report that came out recently was Iran using Bitcoin. Okay. So Iran moved hundreds of millions in crypto during the nationwide internet blackout, a report reveals. And this came out yesterday, by the way. So they're just now reporting on this over there at Fox News. It says new report claims hundreds of millions flowed from Iranian accounts after the strikes, with funds supporting proxy operations and personal wealth protection. So I'm bringing this up because this conversation around crypto just came to the forefront real quick. All right. And let's watch and let's see how this continues to evolve. And I'll come back to Iran saying that if you want to bring oil through the Strait of Hormuz, it needs to be paid for in yuan. We'll talk about why that might be the case or how they might even be able to pull something like that off. So anyways, just to be clear, like Iran is not a stranger to crypto. Iran, the government and the Iranian people also are familiar with crypto. We can see that wallets linked to the IRGC received more than $3 billion in cryptocurrency in 2025, according to the internal report based on blockchain intelligence data cited by Rakia. The report also cites publicly available data from blockchain analysis firm Chainalysis, which estimated Iran's cryptocurrency ecosystem reached $7.78 billion in activity in 2025. Once again, no strangers to crypto. The IRGC has been financing proxy operations through the very same crypto corridors that sanctions were designed to shut down. Okay. So the Treasury will continue to pursue Iranian networks and corrupt elites who enrich themselves at the expense of the people, Besson said in a Treasury press release in January. This also applies to attempts by the regime to use digital assets to circumvent sanctions. All right, so we're going to get into the meat and bones of this in just a second, because this right here is crazy. But first, I want to talk about what Jim Bianco said about this idea of Iran trying to force people to use the yuan to get through the Strait of Hormuz. So let me read you this post from him, because I think this also illuminates a little bit of the things to think about here. So Jim Bianco said, the cryptic announcement that Iran will allow tankers to pass through the Strait of Hormuz if their cargo is paid in yuan has many problems. Unless there are more details offered, view it as propaganda and not as a workable idea. If you're interested in why, here's some thoughts. The first thing he said is that no operational mechanics were explained. How exactly does Iran verify what currency a cargo was paid in before granting passage? Oil trades involve a chain of counterparties, producers, traders, refiners, and buyers, often with multiple legs of financing and settlement. There's no manifest line that says paid in yuan. Is Iran proposing to inspect banking records at the Strait, demand SWIFT confirmations from Chinese banks? This isn't a tariff booth. It's one of the world's most complex commodity markets. There's no operational framework described because there likely isn't one. Okay, let's go ahead and just pause there for a second, because this right here is massive. There are multiple different counterparties, producers, traders, refiners, and end buyers, often with multiple legs of financing and settlement. Guys, if Iran were to propose a technological solution for how this could happen, right? What might that look like? What types of technologies are you and I familiar with that enable for us to actually identify from source to end of the supply chain or the value chain of transactions and settlements as they're happening, potentially online, potentially somewhere that could be broadcasted, potentially where it could be an immutable record, so where you couldn't really easily lie either, right? Sounds like a massive campaign for blockchain and distributed ledger technology. So let me keep moving on here. The Saudis tried exactly this in 2022 and quietly killed it. When Saudi Arabia floated yuan-denominated oil sales to China, it generated huge headlines in 2022. It went nowhere. Once you collect yuan, what do you do with it? China's bond market is partially closed to foreigners. Capital controls limit repatriation, and yuan-denominated assets globally are a tiny fraction of what dollar assets offer. Oil exporters need somewhere safe, liquid, and deep to park their revenues. That somewhere is U.S. Treasuries, not Chinese yuan-denominated bonds. And then he goes that Chinese capital markets are not deep enough. The U.S. Treasury market trades $800 billion plus daily. That depth is why the dollar is the oil settlement currency, not politics, not the petrodollar agreement, but pure market structure. If every barrel transiting Hormuz, roughly 15 to 20 million barrels a day pre-war, suddenly needed yuan to purchase, the demand shock on a managed, partially closed currency would be enormous. China's capital markets cannot absorb that recycling flow. And then he said a surging yuan could actually hurt China. Massive forced yuan buying would likely send the currency soaring. And that's the last thing Beijing wants. China is already battling deflation. Its export sector is under tariff pressure from the US. A sharply stronger yuan erodes export competitiveness. China has spent years carefully managing a gradual appreciation of the yuan for strategic reasons. A shock appreciation forced by Iran is not in Beijing's interest. Okay, so now this is also very important. Why can't you see my screen, bro? Yeah, this software is bugging out on me today. At least it wasn't a video this time. So I'm reading this from Jim Bianco research, just so that you're aware. So the last piece he says is that there's no indication that Beijing has endorsed or agreed to this plan. Further, China has carefully avoided being drawn into the military conflict, suddenly becoming a financial clearinghouse for the Hormuz Passage with the secondary sanctions that come with it is exactly what Chinese banks want to avoid. China buys Iranian oil through shadow fleet intermediaries specifically to avoid formal yuan settlement mechanisms that would expose Chinese banks to U.S. sanctions. This reads like a trial balloon from Tehran, not a workable financial architecture. It suffers from the same structural reasons that killed the Saudi yuan oil experiment in 2022. With the added complications of U.S. sanctions and the absence of Chinese buy-in, the dollar's dominance in oil markets is a function of capital market depth and convertibility, not something a straight closure can unilaterally rewrite. Okay. My goodness, guys. Yeah. Forgot the software situation. So, with all of that said, right, basically, it doesn't really help Iran to have, it doesn't really necessarily help China to have this trade being settled in yuan, right? And so China might actually be against this happening because it could increase the value of their dollar. And the thing about increasing the value of their dollar is that then it makes it harder for people to buy Chinese goods. China doesn't want that. China wants people to buy their goods. They want a cheaper currency, right? And so a couple of things here, right? So no one really wants to have that problem. The US what have they been trying to do over the past year? The US has been trying to lower the value of their currency, right? Same kind of a thing. We want to export more. We want, hey, buy our stuff, buy from the US. So we're starting to get to a point here where ding, ding, it might be that no one wants to be the reserve currency anymore. It might be that the US is like, listen, I'm okay with not being the reserve currency because I want a cheap enough currency for people to buy it. Now, the reality is that there's no replacement for the treasury market as it stands, but there might be innovations for how all of that stuff works. Now, I haven't worked out the entire idea here in my head here, but I'll continue to do that throughout this week, and I'll probably give you guys a video on it. But we might be looking at the need for some sort of a neutral bridge currency. We might be looking at the need for some sort of a neutral bridge asset through which trade can be settled across the globe. If we were to try to figure something like that out, we would certainly need a way to make this currency potentially auditable, right? Something that can be audited, something that's transparent enough for people to be able to audit the trail, right, of where the transactions are actually originating from and who's getting paid and whatnot, right? This is what Iran is really calling for. And I'm just going to move forward a little bit because there's also some updates, and we'll come back to that conversation in just a second. But earlier, I believe this morning, Trump put out a Truth Social statement, and this all ties in, so stick with me. He said many countries, especially those who are affected by Iran's attempted closure of the Hormuz Strait, will be sending warships in conjunction with the USA to keep the strait open and safe. We have already destroyed 100% of Iran's military capability, but it's easy for them to send a drone or two, drop a mine, or deliver a close-range missile somewhere along or in the waterway, no matter how badly defeated they are. Hopefully, China, France, Japan, South Korea, and the UK, and others that are affected by this artificial constraint will send ships to the area so that the Hormuz Strait will no longer be a threat by a nation that has been totally decapitated. In the meantime, the US will be bombing the heck out of the shoreline and continually shooting Iranian boats and ships out of the water. One way or another, we will soon get the Hormuz Strait open, safe, and free. Now, check this out, right? Check this out. France, they came through and they said that they will send 10 warships to the Strait of Hormuz after President Trump called on countries to join the U.S. Navy in attempting to reopen the key passage. The U.S. has declined to deploy an aircraft carrier. Now, Shanaka Pereira, one of our favorites over here, he made an interesting statement about some of this. So let's read through this really quickly. Trump just invited China to send warships to protect the waterway China is using to replace the dollar. Read his Truth Social post carefully. It's the most strategically loaded sentence of the war. Hopefully, China, France, Japan, South Korea, and the UK, and others are affected by this artificial constraint will send ships to the area so that the strait will no longer be a threat by a nation that has been totally decapitated. So Shanaka says this invitation is a trap. Every possible Chinese response damages China. If Beijing sends warships, it legitimizes an American-led coalition, subordinates Chinese naval power to U.S. command architecture, and abandons its diplomatic neutrality with Iran. The country currently offering Chinese yuan-only passage through the strait that everyone else is locked out of. China loses its shadow fleet advantages, its discounted Iranian crude, and its SIPS leverage in a single deployment. SIPS is a payment system, I think. Yeah, the cross-border interbank payment system. So moving forward, if Beijing refuses, it confirms what Washington wants the world to see, that China is willing to let the global economy burn rather than contribute to the security of the waterway that carries 45% of its own crude imports. Every nation paying $96 a barrel while China pays less through yuan-settled shadow fleet deliveries will note who showed up and who did not. The free rider narrative writes itself, and America writes the next chapter of dollar dominance with it. So pay attention here. Trump named 6 countries. 5 are allies or partners. Japan is signing Golden Dome in 5 days. I guess this is an agreement that I'm not familiar with, but we'll look at that in just a second. France operates from Djibouti. The UK from Bahrain. South Korea has direct Hormuz energy exposure. Their participation is expected. China's participation is the question, and the question is the weapon, he says. While 16 million barrels of Iranian crude have transited to China since 28th of February through shadow tankers settling in Yuan, while SIPs processed 24 trillion in 2025 at a 43% growth rate, while Iran offered to reopen the strait exclusively for Yuan cargo, Trump posted a sentence that forces China to choose between its shadow economy and its public legitimacy. So the SIPs system is Chinese sort of SWIFT, from what I understand, right? So basically, what he's saying here is that China has been settling more and more of their trade in this system, and their rather alternative to the SWIFT system. And he said that it had a 43% growth in 2025. So just wanted to point out that because that's a lot of language in there. So, and now he moves forward to say that the post also contains an admission that no briefing has delivered. We have already destroyed 100% of Iran's military capability, but it's easy for them to send a drone or two. The president of the United States just acknowledged that the total military victory does not equal total waterway security. Iran's military is destroyed, but the coastline is not. A defeated nation with a 33-kilometer shoreline, $500 mines, and $20,000 drones can deny passage to the world's most important choke point indefinitely because the weapons of denial are cheaper than the weapons of dominance. Okay. So bomb the coast, shoot the boats, and hope the 6 nations send warships to escort tankers that have no insurance, no P&I coverage, and no private sector willingness to transit a waterway the president himself admits a defeated nation can still threaten. The coalition call is not about Iran. Iran's military. The coalition call is about the world that emerges after Iran. If America escorts the tankers alone, the strait reopens under American control, and dollar pricing survives. If a coalition escorts them, the strait reopens under international consensus, and the Yuan for Hormuz proposal dies. If nobody escorts them, the strait stays closed, and China's shadow fleet is the only commerce moving through it. Trump is not asking for help. He is asking every nation to declare which monetary system they want the strait to operate under when the war ends. The warships are the ballot. The strait is the polling station. The currency is the vote. Very, very well written piece here by Shanaka. Now, he writes a lot of stuff that can be considered somewhat sensationalist, but I think this one was actually very, very well put together in trying to illustrate the situation at hand, right? Because we see how Trump likes to negotiate. We saw how he did it with Greenland. What did he do? He said, look, Europe, you guys aren't contributing the same amount of military dollars to defend your region as we are. So we're just going to take Greenland. How about that? Now, obviously, that's a high negotiating bar that he set. And then he was like, okay, maybe we don't need the whole Greenland. We won't just take over Greenland, but we want a piece. We want these strategic parts of it. Blah, blah, blah. And all of this, he had negotiating leverage because NATO and the European Union and all of them are not contributing the same amount of dollars to military power as the US is. So he said, look, this is unfair. And in fact, like, what are you even going to do about it? Is kind of what Trump was saying. Like, are you're gonna spend more on military to come and defend Greenland? Perfect. That's exactly what he wanted. So basically, that's what he did there. And so now he's kind of pulling a very similar move here, potentially, with the Strait of Hormuz and these ships that he's trying to get through. So he's saying, look, if I'm going to, make sure that everybody can get through, then I'm going to control this waterway, right? Like it's the US now that's in control of what's coming in and out of here. But if you also contribute, then you will also have some say, just by nature, right? You guys are there. We don't obviously want to have a war over the Strait of Hormuz. So if we're all together and we're all chilling and you guys contribute your piece of the pie to making sure that this all happens, then you'll have a piece of the say in how this all goes moving forward. So I thought this was a very well written piece by Shanaka Pereira outlining some of the politics and the power structure of what this situation in the Strait of Hormuz really looks like. So, anyways, so that's kind of the piece that I wanted to talk about there. Now, there's a couple of things here that I want to come back to on this idea of stablecoins. Okay. If Iran is trying to get a different currency to be used to settle trade and then they'll allow people through, then let's talk about what the different options might potentially be. The Chinese yuan, we talked about why China might not even want that. Okay, China might be like, no, we don't want that. We'll just send our ships over here and open up the Strait of Hormuz because we don't want that. We definitely don't want that. This is fascinating to think about. And then, so China doesn't want that. The U.S. right now is wanting the U.S. dollar, I guess, to be used potentially, right? And Iran is also asking for basically a way to verify who is using what currencies. And that might also be something that everybody wants. Let's see, right? Because the SIPS system, right, the Chinese SWIFT, right, is being used at an alarming or an increasing rate, right? So the U.S. might say, we also don't want that. We also want transparency over what systems are being used, right? This shadow fleet that's running in and out to China. We don't want that either. So there's a lot of different things that are being put together to incentivize, hey, this is what we want to do. I also want to take a second because I did forget to go back to that super chat. Oh no. I missed that super chat. That super chat was about Bitcoin. Yeah, you don't have to do a super chat again, but just put your comment again and I'll make sure that I get to it. So we need to find a way, also potentially here, potentially, I'm just going to pose the idea that maybe there's an idea that we want a currency that's separate from all of this. Now, gold sounds great. Gold would be an awesome solution. But the problem with gold is that gold is not a digital system. Gold is not a system that I can broadcast the transparency of all of the different transactions that have happened on chain. I can't do that with gold. I need a digital system that allows me to track the origination of payments, who are the counterparties, who's trading with who, and so on and so forth. Is the oil that's on this ship, can I verify that that oil has been paid for with this currency? That's going to require digital technologies. So now I don't think that, once again, this is me saying that this is a path that we could see. I'm not saying this is what has to happen, but this is a path that we might see start to get carved out here. So I'm going to let some other people talk on some of this as well, and some of the implications of what this actually means for you and I, right? Let's say that bridge currency, stable coins, and all that stuff aside, what are the things to think about with this conflict and how we can position ourselves as investors as well? Let's hear Josh Young talk about this really quickly, how he's seeing the development of the process with the ETFs and the oil companies playing out. So let's talk about that real quick and we'll move back to digital currencies as well.
It looks like this is the largest oil supply disruption in history. And there's a huge amount of oil offline. More and more production is being shut in across various Middle Eastern countries. And inventories were already at low levels on a seasonally adjusted basis and maybe likely to collapse in addition to the strategic petroleum reserves of various Western countries, including the United States, over the coming weeks and months. So as a part of this, it's been interesting to see how oil prices have reacted versus how oil stocks have reacted, with the oil stock indexes up quite a bit less over the last couple of weeks than the oil price, which is part of why I'm doing this. I do think that over time there's an observable high correlation between these stocks and the price of oil. And I do think that that will persist. There's various reasons why specific companies, which are large index constituents of the index for XLE and XOP, and even some of the other ones, why individual companies might be materially lagging due to Middle Eastern operations and potentially not being able to benefit from the increase in price and potential activity level. And so I think it's never been more interesting as an energy investor to be picking specific oil stocks that may be substantial net beneficiaries of the situation, both from higher oil prices as well as from not having their operations impeded or not materially impeded like many of their peers, which may be a major factor in temporarily holding back the performance of ETFs and indexes like XOP.
So basically, he's thinking about the dispersion, essentially, of these indexes as all of this continues to play out. There's going to be particular winners and losers, is what his thesis on that was. Now, let me get back to the Canadian Ed's comment. He said, my comment was about a hypothesis I had that Bitcoin was being used to bootstrap AI infrastructure to cement US AI super dominance. Yeah, I'm sorry that I didn't see the exact comment. We've had somebody pointed out there's a lot of activity in the chat today. I haven't seen it like this before, so that's on me. So let me go ahead and shift to, so we talked about Exxon on here, a nice amount. I did see that Exxon has a nice amount of their infrastructure in this around the Strait of Hormuz, so they might not immediately actually see a whole lot of benefits from what is happening here. They might actually be slowed down some from this as well. So just something to keep in mind, guys, thinking about the different types of stocks that might perform best in this type of a situation. Now, let's zoom back in on this de-dollarization trend, because this is the thing that I think is going to be the easiest thing to try to capture as an opportunity throughout all of this. So let's hear one of our favorites here, Catherine Austin Fitz, talk about how de-dollarization could impact this entire situation. And this is, and I think it's not a super old clip, but it is not necessarily super relevant as well. Let me show you what she was saying about de-dollarization in particular, though.
Right. For 3 decades, I've been saying the dollar's not going to collapse. The dollar's not going to collapse. So now I'm going to say you need to be prepared in case it does, because it could. It could collapse this year. I'm not saying it will. I don't think it will. But
and when we talk about collapse, there's a difference between an orderly decline,
right,
and disorderly and frantic.
Right. So now we're in an orderly decline.
Yes. Right.
Although it's not an orderly world, but it's an orderly decline.
Yes.
So, we've been talking about our scenarios for 2026, and there are 2 axes on our scenario design. One is de-dollarization, which can be fast or slow.
Mm-hmm.
We're literally not conceiving of a scenario when dollars go up.
Yeah.
The stablecoins is successful. It could. So I think if it's successful, slow down the de-dollarization. It won't stop.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, but then the other axis is violent disruption, a lot of which is man-made.
Mm-hmm.
And what's very interesting, and I know you experience this with your clients all the time, if de-dollarization is fast, then we will feel that as much higher inflation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or I would say it's cost of goods.
Mm-hmm.
So household cost of goods skyrockets, energy, housing, etc. Violent disruption can be highly deflationary.
Mm-hmm.
It can also be inflationary, but it can generally, it's like a deflation machine. You know, I used to say Fauci's job was to manufacture deflation. Had nothing to do with health. You get a call, and the central bankers need more deflation. Shut Main Street down.
Violent disruption is a much more local thing, where de-dollarization is more of a countrywide federal thing.
Yeah, so de-dollarization hits everybody in the balance sheet, no matter where you are, right? And cost of capital. But violent disruption depends on where it is.
Right.
Right.
A geophysical event might only impact Tim in Philadelphia and not even come near somebody who's on the western side of the country.
Right. So violent disruption we have at 2025 levels or great
Ramping
intensification.
Up.
Right. And I think there's a relationship, because the more you de-dollarize, the faster you go, the more inflation you create, the more Mr. Global has reason to increase violent disruption.
To offset.
Right.
The violence is the new Anthony Fauci.
Yeah.
So slow disruption or quick movement away from the US dollar, and thinking through what impacts that might have. So I see the conversation being had in the comments, and I love it. The conversation here is Bitcoin versus XRP. I see you guys. I see it. And let's have some of that conversation. I'll pull up a piece of this because we're thinking about two different things, right? We're talking about people using certain currencies and methods of communicating value to the world. And then we're talking about the countries and their central banks. All right. And those are two separate things. And I think it's worth having a conversation about both of them because both of these assets have totally different use cases. So let's continue this conversation. We've heard Chamath Palihapitiya. He's been a huge Bitcoin supporter. He talks about how he's one of his biggest mistakes was selling Bitcoin in the past, but he's also come out very recently, a couple of months ago, and made a statement about Bitcoin as well. Let's hear what he had to say. I feel like we've even talked about this before, but let's hear Chamath talk about this.
I think the reality is that Bitcoin, for the most part at this point, is there's a structural failing in Bitcoin that I think people will need to come and wrap their heads around. The structural failing is that it is not. So if you think about like what is the value maximizing function right now for a crypto asset to be broadly adopted, it needs to have the features that allow a central bank to adopt it. And there are two things that it lacks. One is fungibility and two is privacy. And so Bitcoin fails on those two dimensions. So it can never be a structural holding of a central bank. Mm-hmm. And that simple thing will keep it in the realm of ETFs and humans. And
does gold satisfy those conditions?
Yeah.
Fungibility, but not easily.
Both. You have no idea how much the Bank of China owns. You don't know how many ounces they own. You don't know how many ounces I own. When there's a public ledger that says this address has this much, and you can't really trade it because you know the history and the provenance of that exact token. It's been used to buy this. It was transacted over here. It went to this wallet. That lack of fungibility and privacy is a huge deterrent for broad structural adoption. That's what you need to then add another 10x of market cap. Mm-hmm. So is there room for a different crypto asset that solves for the privacy and fungibility? Yeah. And are there projects right now? Yes, but they're very small scale. There's huge issues with them. Those are even more volatile. So Bitcoin's interesting.
So guys, this is just Chamath's, latest take on the whole Bitcoin thing, right? Now, the things that he's pointing out are the fungibility and the privacy situation. This is something that I pointed out very early in my YouTube journey was that, Bitcoin is not a privacy solution, right? It very hardly solves the privacy problem. But I don't think that that's necessarily what it's meant to do, right? It was never meant to be like a privacy solution. This was more built as a way to address a different issue, which is having a money system that exists outside of central banks. Okay, so Bitcoin has a different use case. All right, it's not about privacy. It's not about cool. The main thing that people in the Bitcoin space, Bitcoin maximalists, are looking for is a sovereignty, a way to have control over their monetary future. Now, when it comes to thinking about whether or not this asset can be used by central banks, we've heard Christine Lagarde, okay, the president of the European Central Bank, many times over say that Bitcoin is too volatile, she says, to ever be a central bank asset. Okay, and then there's other concerns like privacy and so on and so forth, right? Countries don't want to have other countries knowing what it is that they're going to do next, right? You need to have some sort of an obfuscation of what financial decisions a country is making, right? This is why everyone wants to control their own financial systems, right? They don't want people to have the insight on what they're going to do with their own money. And with Bitcoin, it's fully out there in the open. You can't really hide, right? So someone says Bitcoin is private enough, and it's like it's private enough for the individual, but it's not private enough for a state actor, right? But the question then becomes, well, do we even want central banks to be using Bitcoin, right? Isn't that against the whole thesis of what we're looking for? Aren't people who are Bitcoin maximalists saying that they believe that this is sovereign money? Well, if you give it to the central bank, then is it still sovereign money? Or does that create different incentive structures around how the world really works? So without going too deep into that, I'm not here to settle the conversation around Bitcoin versus XRP or anything like that. But I just want us to make sure that we're thinking about, as this war is continuing to heat up, what is the real conversation being had, and what could this push us toward? So let me go ahead and move forward. We had Stanley Druckenmiller, one of the most successful, famous investors of all time, talking about crypto very recently in one of these podcasts. It was actually in a different interview that we talked about where he was saying, I kind of forgot actually what he said in that one, but we'll play this one for you here because I think this is a really good excerpt of him talking about specifically crypto and what he thinks about it as it stands. So hear him talk about this really quickly.
On the other hand, blockchain and the use of stablecoins, if you want to throw crypto into that, tokens, incredibly useful in terms of productivity. I assume our whole payment systems will be stablecoins in 10 or 15 years. Efficient, quicker, cheaper.
Dollar as a reserve currency.
It's the cleanest, dirtiest shirt or whatever that saying is. I think it'll be around for a while. We're doing everything we can to destroy it, but I'm 72. It'll probably outlive me. I doubt it'll be the reserve currency in 50 years, but I don't have a clue what would be. Maybe some crypto thing I hate.
Maybe some crypto thing he hates. But he does believe that stablecoins will be a very important piece of the future financial system. He says our whole payment systems will be stablecoins in 10 to 15 years. And Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Coinbase, came out and actually said, Druck is right. Saddle up. Okay, this was earlier today, or I guess overnight. He said that. So just wanted to kind of point out what some of the big dogs are saying about this situation, right? A couple of things that I want to point to. Look, XRP, Bitcoin, XLM, Cardano, guys, let's hear what the people have to say. Let's hear it, because when it comes to Ripple and XRP, their whole statement, right, has been neutral bridge currency, neutral bridge currency, neutral bridge currency. They've been talking about that for almost a decade plus now. Whether or not that's a reality, right? Whether or not that's kind of a psyop, we still have to look at what are the incentive structures around why someone would want to use it, or why someone might want something like a Ripple or an XRP. So let me go ahead and share this tab and hear this guy say some things about this. Someone also said, what happens when it goes, what uses Bitcoin when the internet goes off, right? So once again, difference between individuals and countries. Individual, I might not be able to use my Bitcoin. Countries, well, there's other countries that you can still settle with. Or if I have my own infrastructure internet, then I can still connect out to, then I'm good. Now, the question also becomes this way, well, not all crypto systems, because you can have an entire distributed ledger technology system, can only work in an online environment. You also have different types of technologies that can allow you to transact with one another without having a connection to the internet. We'll talk about that in just a bit, but let's watch this quick clip here first. Let me make sure you guys can see and hear. Cool.
This is what David Short says. 99% of people know they're not going to be the global reserve currency. So they'd rather have a neutral bridge currency instead of having their opponent or their biggest rival have a global reserve currency. The only way to get all the nations to agree to a global reserve currency is it has to be a neutral currency that nobody controls, agnostic. But what they're doing with the private ledger, unfortunately, which are carbon copy clones of the public XRP ledger, and this is all the Ripple website, the CBDC platforms, which are carbon copy clones of the public ledger, but they're private. What they're allowing the central banks and governments to do with that is that they will be allowed to do their own monetary policy. They don't have to hold the US dollar or another currency to do global trade. They don't have to denominate their debts in US dollar or other currencies. They can do their own monetary policy. Everybody's happy. The US can do whatever they want with their currency, with their inflation, with their interest rates or whatever, because everybody is not relying now. They're not forced to hold another sovereign currency. So it democratizes the whole idea. The whole thing allows, like I said, it just allows every nation to do whatever they want. So everybody can agree to it. But the private CBDC ledgers have these mechanisms in place that governments have full control.
To learn more, join me.
Okay, let's keep this going, because there's a lot of conversations that have been had around this over the past decade. We might be coming to a point where these conversations around a neutral bridge currency might come into play. Let's hear this clip here.
Monetary policy in a country, or as it is the case in the Eurozone, within the Eurozone, is defined by the central bank, the Fed, the European Central Bank. And this monetary policy applies to the territory, the jurisdiction. How could central bank digital currency cross borders and go into another jurisdiction? Would that create a risk of currency substitution? So everybody says, I want ECB's CBDC. I want the euro. And these are unresolved issues, but it doesn't mean they cannot be resolved. This is why, from the fund, we are advocating to think about this world of digital money as a global public good. And in a recent discussion in Zurich, where we both were, what we advocated for is to have a public platform. So when protocols are agreed, this public platform can connect different CBDCs. There can be interoperability, the same way you would transfer euros from one country to another. You do it using CBDCs.
Where XRP could come into play potentially is when you're looking at cross-border CBDC. So when you have a digital dollar and you have a digital, real, or digital pound, you obviously need to have some way to interact cross-border. Yeah. So I think the BIS call this a multi-CBDC model. One of the ideas is you use a sort of a neutral bridge currency to go from one to the other, similar to the model I explained earlier, with our on-demand liquidity. But the core offering really is not XRP. There's no XRP involved. It's the native token is the CBDC.
The potentially fast and wide adoption of a global stablecoin, potentially a global currency governed only by the incentives of a private company, is something that will deserve and will receive the highest level of regulatory expectations. And is regulation where it needs to be on global stablecoins yet? It's not, but we're making progress.
I think there are also concerns about what does it mean, again, from a geopolitical perspective, if should another currency arise as the world's reserve currency, or if there's a non-state currency, so to speak, that becomes a world's reserve. That's another thing that I think people are very concerned about.
Looking forward, rapid changes are taking place in the global monetary system that may affect the international role of the dollar in the future. Looking forward, rapid changes are taking place in the global monetary system that may affect the international role of the dollar in the future. Most major economies already have or are in the process of developing instant 24/7 payments. Our own FedNow service will be coming online in 2023. And in light of the tremendous growth in crypto assets and stablecoins, we are examining whether a U.S. central bank digital currency would improve upon what is an already safe and efficient domestic payment system. As our white paper on this topic notes, a U.S. CBDC could also potentially help maintain the dollar's international standing.
All right, folks, listen. Could this be a moment where we start seeing the use of or the promotion of a need for some central bank digital currencies? Now, in the United States, the government has been very clear about trying to not allow CBDCs in any way, right? Like legislation's being passed around this and trying to make it clear. So we're as citizens, we're in this weird place where we see technology that allows potentially enables central bank digital currency developments. We know that central bank digital currencies are probably not a good thing. The thing that's going to happen here is that if any country, which the European Central Bank is going to launch their own digital euro, whether they call it a CBDC or not, we'll see. Once a country does that, other countries are going to have to find a way to compete. Now, the U.S.'s way to compete is going to be through stablecoins, is what it seems to be at the moment. The difference between a CBDC and a stablecoin is going to be very small when it all comes down to it all. The only difference will be that there's an intermediation, right, between the central bank money itself and the issuers of these stablecoins. So you won't get the CBDC from the Fed. You won't have your account at the Fed. You'll have your digital wallet that holds USDT, USDC. But for other countries, it might not be that way. They might directly tie their central bank digital currencies into their population's banking systems. And so what I'm constantly doing is I'm looking at the situation. I'm saying, okay, well, how do I get what alpha is there for me in this situation, right? One way or the other. There are technologies that enable central bank digital currencies that might be coming to some parts of the world. And then eventually everyone's going to have to try to compete. So what am I going to do? I'm going to kind of like potentially be prepared for that kind of a technology to take place. I'm going to look for the equities situations that will allow me to participate in that. I'm going to look at the crypto situations that might allow me to participate in that. And I'm going to also make sure that I read the documentation around the development of all these CBDCs. So let me pull this up real quick because I want you guys to see that this stuff has been being worked on for quite some time. So this is from the Bank for International Settlements' Innovation Hub. This was October 2022, so almost 4 years ago. Connecting economies through CBDC, Project Enbridge. Okay, you guys have probably seen this before. And if you haven't, then just know that this is kind of where we're at. They talk about cross-border payments, international trade as Enbridge's first business use case. Let's even just go to that page and see what it looks like. So this is the Bank for International Settlements, which is like the central bank of central banks. Okay, they clear payments that central banks are essentially settling with one another across borders. So central bank digital currency, if it were to come about, they'd be the first place to pay attention to it. So this doesn't say anything super fun, but the point is that there's been experiments, countless experiments that have been done around central bank digital currencies with the participation of companies like Ripple. Okay. Look at the types of banks: the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the Bank of Thailand, the Central Bank of the UAE, the Digital Currency Institute, People's Bank of China. And just this one project, there's tons of them. There's another project from the BIS that I wanted to share with you guys called Project Polaris, a high-level design guide for offline payments. The design of offline payments with central bank digital currency is a complex undertaking. Some challenges and trade-offs cannot be solved easily. Further, since each central bank has unique requirements, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. This was October 2023. A high-level design guide for offline payments with CBDC. They talk about the design choices, the motivations, all these different things. So I just want to show you guys that like this work is being done, whether or not we want it or would like to see this happen. This is kind of where the world is at. There needs to be an update to payment systems, especially in international systems, because what's happening here is that there's a lot of shadow banking, a lot of shadow oil tanking, a lot of shadow trade that's happening. And governments are not really okay with that. The US government is saying, hey, we want to know that you guys aren't building an alternative system to the US dollar. Iran wants to know that if you're going to do trade through the Strait of Hormuz, for me to let you through, you need to be doing trade in Chinese yuan or not in the US dollar. Okay. So this currency war that we've seen playing out over the past couple of decades has turned into a physical one. And once you take a currency and economic war and it turns into a kinetic war, okay, that's the point where we're going to see something change. I saw someone comment on one of my shorts. They were like, nothing ever happens. And like, well, something is happening right now. And it's one of the biggest developments that we've seen in geopolitics in the past. I mean, since I've probably been alive, is one of the biggest things. The closing of the Strait of Hormuz is going to collapse the entire economy, the entire global economy, if it does not get solved. We're seeing that there is a desire to change the currency systems in order to get the Strait of Hormuz back open. As we're going through this, by the end of this, we're very likely to see the conversation around distributed ledger technology, digital currencies, tokenized gold, all of this stuff is going to come to the forefront. And we're seeing all the legislation coming into place in the background. We're seeing all the banks having been pretty much ready to go ahead and launch all of this entry into the digital currency world. So guys, whether you like cryptocurrencies or not, what I always recommend is that we always keep our hedges in place so that no matter what happens, we're going to participate in the upside if there's any opportunities that are there. Bitcoin is slow. It's not useful. It's no use case. Okay, well, maybe there is. Maybe there is a place for Bitcoin to have its space, right? Maybe it's not the number one crypto. Maybe it's not the most important thing, but maybe to some people it is. The weird thing about this whole money system thing is that it kind of becomes, as someone, I think discreet play ball said, it kind of becomes a game of perception, right? Like the reason the US Treasury market is so liquid and why every country needs US dollars to buy US Treasuries is because people believe that the US Treasury is always going to pay them back. That's how it started, at least. Everyone knows that the US can't default on its own debt. And so, what better place to put your money than the most liquid treasury market in the world? Because I believe that it's the most liquid treasury market in the world, that's where I'm going to put my money. And so, this whole crypto thing becomes very interesting because it's like, well, eventually you've got a certain amount of people that believe in Bitcoin and Bitcoin only. But then you're going to have a whole faction of people that are like, actually, Bitcoin is worthless and I only care about XRP. And I think we get to the point to where there's going to be two ways of looking at this. The question is going to be, what are the enterprises and what are these central banks doing? Okay, because it eventually doesn't matter what you think. If the people with the power and the money, right, are moving into a certain direction, you can fight against that. You can, and I recommend that you do try to have at least attempt, right, to maintain some sovereignty against that system. But then that doesn't mean that you just exclude the fact that that's happening. Okay, you can't just deny that it's occurring. It is. And they've got the guns, they've got the nukes, right? So eventually, you kind of got to like think about how you can also play that game. At least that's my thesis and how I look at it. So someone asks, so what cryptos do you pay attention to? What cryptos do you buy? Well, you guys are pretty familiar with me. Of course, I'm positioned in assets like what Ripple has been continuing to develop. Of course, I'm thinking about how to position myself in assets like Chainlink, which the DTCC has partnered up with on several initiatives for bringing off-chain information on-chain and for cross-chain interoperability. There's also other things that allow the types of systems that I was talking about where you can trade offline, where you can have Bluetooth be used as a way to send payments back and forth using distributed ledger technologies, but in an offline format, in an operating system level format, so that if you do go offline, that's okay. We'll just update the ledgers when we get back online because we've got these transaction hashes stored locally. So my point being here is that I'm going to open it up to the chat. I want you guys to kind of just send some questions. If you want to super chat it, because there's a lot of people here, you can do that. You don't have to do that. I'll do my best to try to keep up with everything. Guys, like be positioned for different types of scenarios. The way that I think about this is, how do I, for one, capture, even if crypto goes away? What if crypto is actually going to zero? Am I going to benefit from central bank digital currencies still? Like, what if central bank digital currencies have nothing to do with crypto? Oh, snap. What if XRP is the answer and it's the only thing that actually matters? What if Bitcoin is the only thing that actually matters? I'm going to take those types of key scenarios, I'm going to play them out in my head, and I'm going to say, okay, this is how I want to be positioned depending upon the weight at which I believe that these things might be possible or probable. So I'm not going to just be a zero on anything because I don't know the future. I'm going to have exposure to different types of outcomes. I'm going to have exposure to banking because I'm like, well, bank stocks might benefit from this world of having faster, cheaper transactions. There might be a higher velocity of transactions that take place. There might be more money that goes into investments when you got tokenized stocks. Higher liquidity might mean a higher value for the entire stock market. What does that mean for a company like BNY Mellon? I don't know. So things like that. Let me go ahead. So Canadian Air. So yeah, so I'm going to open up to the chat. I want you guys to, ask any questions you may have or anything that you guys want to talk about. Let's hear all of that. Shout out to you, Martin J. Schwartz 6. He said, look into the BIS projects, Project Dunbar or Project Sela, Project Icebreaker. Bunch of bangers in there. He's giving you guys the sauce with that. Now, yeah, so opening it up to the chat, guys, as you guys know, I just started a partnership with Caleb and Brown. So I'm buying some of my crypto over here with these guys as well. And the reason is because with Caleb and Brown, I have somebody that I can talk to when I'm making decisions about what I want to do. And if you're someone who's newer to the space or even just wants to have the luxury of having that kind of a service, very few crypto companies are offering anything like that, right? This is the only place that I've seen that I actually trust and believe in. And they've been around for a long time. They've been around since 2016, I believe. Since longer than I've been in the game. They've been around. And so if you haven't already, I highly recommend that you just set up a free account with Caleb and Brown. You can actually find them at the link in the description. You can set up an account with them there. And once again, this is a place, this is an exchange, a brokerage, where you have no withdrawal limits. And so for me, I gotta have something like that in my arsenal. I've got a ton of different exchanges and brokerages that I deal with, a ton of different wallets and hardware and everything. Like nothing should be consolidated. You should always have different paths in and out. And Caleb and Brown is one of the only ones that has no withdrawal limits. And to me, that alone is a reason to set up an account with Caleb and Brown. Because once things start heating up, and it can be at any minute, you never really know. You just got to be prepared. You got to have these exchanges. You got to KYC, meaning submit your ID and all that stuff, because you don't want to have an exchange account that you can't actually use. You want to make sure that you can pull money in and off. And so submit your KYC, do that as soon as you set up your account. And after that, you'll have someone who's going to either reach out to you or you can reach out to them and they'll start to get you involved with the platform, teach you about how everything works and get you set up over there. And if you want someone to have as a point of contact, Jim Bazzani is my contact there, and he's going to take care of you guys. You can actually send him an email. His email is in the description of this video. You can email him for any questions that you may have about the service. You can do that before you set up an account as well, just to kind of talk to him and learn a little bit more about the services and how it all works. So this entire stream is sponsored by Caleb and Brown. Huge thanks to them. I'm very grateful for this partnership. I think this is awesome. I don't have time, guys, to talk to every single person about all of this stuff. And I do have, by the way, for anyone who is interested, I do have in the link in the description as well, a link for you guys to be able to connect with me one-on-one if you guys want, but those are paid consultations. So with these guys, they can walk you through some of the basics. They can help you get your account set up if this is something that you're ever interested in learning more about as far as the crypto thing goes. And so it's super helpful to have that connection and partnership because, yeah, I can't talk to everybody one-on-one. So anyways, that's what I got for you there. Check it out. Caleb and Brad, you can set up a free account. Click the link in the description. I'll also put it in the chat as well. So let's hear what you guys are talking about in the chat. What's up, guys? How would you play the energy? The Zodiac Zoo said, how would you play energy sector right now with oil rising? USO? So USO is like just the US oil price, essentially. It's a fund. It's a US oil fund. So I think that's one way that you can look at it, right? There's so many different ways to try to look at it. What I would say is that a couple of things to think about when you're talking about like geopolitical types of trading. One of them is that you want to be as careful about doing proxy bets, which is not what you're recommending. You're saying, I just want to own the oil. That's one thing that you could do, right? But what you want to avoid is getting too deep into like the proxy bet, which is that, let's say, I think that oil is going to go up and therefore oil company stocks are going to go up and therefore their software provider is going to start going up. It's like, well, that's a huge stretch, right? This is like a third order event that must have the other two things occurring for this third thesis to even have a chance of working out. So that's one of the first things that I would actually say to that. And then the other thing is, so yes, you can look at it that way. I'm going to be honest, like I'm very particular about trying to trade oil because of the fact that it's so geopolitically heavy. Like I think a couple of months ago, it would have been cool to get long dated options on oil because you just kind of saw the conflict bubbling up. But the problem is that now any headline is gonna cause a problem, right? It could bring the oil price back down. And in fact, you're going to see Trump trying to do that over and over again. And so, what was I going to say here? And so another thing is with the U.S. oil fund, I'm not sure that the U.S. oil fund pays dividends or not. But one thing about thinking about like a ETF in the oil sector or a company in the oil sector is that they're going to pay a dividend. So you're going to get paid for holding that risk regardless, right? So that's one thing about the oil fund that's not as great versus having exposure to an oil equities play. So that's another thing that I would think about when trying to think, how do we do that? Let's see. Any questions that you guys have, let me know, because we're coming up on the 2-hour mark at this point. More monkey business 589. I'll actually talk to you about that later because I'm not really sure. Let's see here. Aceman LLC said, respectfully, I will stick with cold wallets. Yeah, well, that's not what the offering is here, right? The offering is to buy crypto with Caleb and Brown or any exchange or brokerage, right? So yeah, so once again, I'll tell you guys my truth. I keep my assets spread out. I think people get so caught up in all the exchanges are only place to don't ever hold your crypto on exchanges. It's like you get protections with exchanges. Someone was also talking about like ETFs. Oh, Bitcoin ETFs are so dumb. Guys, you get protections with a Bitcoin ETF. If you get hacked, if you get stolen from, like you lose, you can't send it to the wrong address. Like you got to think about, first off, there's different people that are dealing with these different things, right? So if you're going to get your 50-year-old, 60-year-old who knows nothing about crypto into crypto, are you really going to tell them to go and buy on Uniswap and then swap it and then you go to MetaMask and then sit, you know what I mean? Like, no, because they're going to mess up somewhere. They're very likely to. So there's two things that you get with having a Bitcoin ETF. First off, you're not responsible for the custody. And secondly, you get investor protections to the SIPC up to, I think it was like $250,000 or $500,000 per account, right? So you have investment protections that you get. So there's always different ways to look at these different things. There's a guy who accidentally connected his hardware wallet to the online because he didn't really know what he was doing or whatever happened. I don't even know what happened, but he lost $3 million of XRP. And now the only way to prevent that from ever being possible is by not having it all in one place, period. Like that's the beauty of this technology, is that you don't have to do that either. You don't have to leave all your money in one place. You can spread it out. You can protect yourself from these catastrophic sigma events. And that's how I play the game, is I've got multiple play. You'll never be able to, like, you know, there's no one single failure point for my holdings. And so that's the whole, I think that's a very prudent way of going about it. So I think of Caleb Brown as a place for me to buy if I want to buy, or sell if I want to sell. And to make sure that if I want to sell, or if I want to take money out of crypto, I've got a place to be able to do that with no withdrawal limits. So you keep your stuff on and off exchanges. You don't have to have everything on Caleb and Brown. You just have an account, you're ready to go, and you use it when you need to. So let's see. Yeah, because the other thing is like, well, so my concern was always with hardware storage is, well, what if legislation comes in and says that it's illegal or whatever? What if there's a back door on these platforms and everyone's, there's a black swan event like that? To me, like, just think about how much, if we think that everything that is going to happen is going to happen, the people who have all of their stuff in cold storage are going to be by far the most kind of like protected people, right? They're going to be the most smart and the most they're going to be the most confident people, is what I'm really trying to say. And if you turn around and you see that Ledger was like an NSA company the whole time, or any of these big ones, right? And all of a sudden there's a backdoor to their software, then you're like, wait a minute, what? Because we've already seen stuff about some of that. right? This is why I have this mindset. This doesn't just come out of nowhere. Like, you just want to basically make it to where there's no one failure point in your security practices, period. So let's see. Let me move on here. My top 3 crypto. I don't look at it that way. Here's what I'll say. My top 3 themes are interoperability. And when I say that, I don't mean just cross-chain interoperability. I mean data interoperability. I mean logic, smart contract interoperability. I mean settlement interoperability. And even interoperability across communications networks, like beyond just the the chain, like Verizon to AT&T. That's my number 1 theme. My second theme would be I mean, it's kind of everything that I care about, to be honest. But I guess the first thing that I could say is like overall interoperability, and then data interoperability, and then maybe some form of distributed consensus mechanism that is important. That is, that I like, right? So you've got the blockchain trilemma. You've got decentralization, security, and scalability. Out of those 3 in the triangle, which one do I care about the most? And where can I find the happy medium that allows me to get the most of each? Right. So for instance, when I think about my investing piece of this, decentralization becomes way less relevant to me, because I don't think that decentralization is something that is needed to see through the benefits of blockchain or distributed ledger technology. I don't think decentralization is the only use case. I think distribution is the major use case, and having several points of failure, but not fully decentralized or corruptible. I think it's more about how can we increase the throughput and scalability of transactions at a lower cost without compromising security completely. But that doesn't mean I need the most secure thing in the world. If it's in any way more scalable than our current system at a cheap enough of a price to where the expected value of making that switch is better, then I'm going to use that. And this is where I think the whole XRP situation people get so caught up and don't understand. It's not about decentralization. It has nothing to do with decentralization. It has to do with lowering the cost of completing the transactions across border. You could say that there's decentralization in terms of the actual the currency itself, right? But my point is that XRP is not about the decentralization of the technological system underlying it per se. It's not really the point. So those are I think I got 3 key themes: overall interoperability, data interoperability, and then like, what is your favorite chain if you had to choose a chain? MJANTATS said, "Hey man, I wanted to come on here and say be careful covering Professor Zhang. He is not a professor or a political science expert. He only has a degree in English literature." Well, I've got a degree in YouTube, so I'll cover the thoughts if I think the thoughts make sense. I definitely understand your concern, but I don't use credentials as a way to try to. I mean, we've already gone through this, right? We already all, as a whole planet, went through this. People with credentials don't necessarily are not the best equipped to allow you to think for yourself. Right. So Professor Zhang, everyone's got a whole lot to say about him right now. He's made a lot of good predictions, a lot of bad ones. The only thing that I take away from his content is how to think. Right. And I think that's the most important thing at the moment. Mary Rippey said, any thoughts on collaborations like Binance and Midnight? Are Binance and Midnight collaborating? I haven't seen that. Introducing the Midnight on Binance hodler airdrops, it looks like. Yeah, I haven't seen that. I don't know anything about it. Creative Outlet said, Professor Jang, from the videos I've seen of his, he seems to be China friendly. I'm not just saying that because he's Asian. He doesn't seem left or right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think he's left or right either. And yeah, I definitely think that he probably, his perspective seems to be more like, it's very anti-America, I would say, more than anything. And I wouldn't say it's anti-America, but just like contra the concept of America just being untouchable, right? I think that's more of what it really is. Let's see here. Zhao Zhongyi said, do you perceive quantum computing as an issue for cold storage wallets in the near future, or is it overhyped and overfeared? Well, so like, for instance, that's another thing. I mean, it wouldn't just be a problem for cold wallet, it'd be a problem for the entire blockchain. If you were to, yeah, if you were to have a quantum computer that could hack a cryptocurrency network, like it would, first off, Bitcoin, for instance, is the most secure network in the world. So if you can hack Bitcoin, you can hack anything. And yeah. All of those things, guys, are concerns. This is why, once again, it's like you have to have different options. You have to have as many options as you can for in and out of the game, into crypto and out of crypto. You want to have as many options. Hardware wallets aren't great places to buy crypto. Right? That's not really an alternative to a brokerage or an exchange. Let me see. Jackie said, can you move crypto into Caleb and Brown, or you can only buy from them? You can move crypto into Caleb and Brown as well, for sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, they would love that. And that's one of the, like, it's a cool place to be able to have something there, to have someone to talk to. Like, once again, it's just not, that's just not something that you always get. Yeah, definitely gold, guys, is something to keep an eye on. I haven't even talked about that at all today, but definitely gold as well is something to think about as far as the de-dollarization trend. Do not keep your mind off of that. Obviously, it's very elevated. That's going to be the biggest thing right now, is that it's super elevated. So you have to be very careful about if you're not already allocated, right? A lot of the people that have already been allocated to gold are in a really good spot. It's hard to try and, enter right now, but doesn't mean that it's not possible. And none of this is financial advice. And do not take financial advice from a random guy on the internet talking to a wall. Okay, let me see what you guys got going on. Ryan verse Burgess said, how much do you charge for the one-on-one sessions? So it's for the half hour, I have it at 350, and then for the 1 hour, it's at 500. So it's really only for people who have a specific thing that you might want to discuss or just want to connect. And it's not about financial advice. None of that is financial advice. It's more about education if you want to learn something, or if you have specific questions about how like things work. Yeah. Or if you just want to connect. I've had someone do that and that was really cool. Let's see. Do I watch or like Camilla Stevenson? I watch some of her stuff. She seems cool. She should definitely come on Memes and Markets. Thoughts for the abstract. I love the question. I love the question. What I'll say about that question is that there's seems to be one side of that equation that feels very threatened by the other one. And then there seems to be one side of that equation where people kind of just understand that those things do not compete with one another at all. They don't. Let's see. My favorite Pokemon. I don't know that I have a favorite Pokemon. Ryan, the link is in the description. It's the last link in the description. It says, for a one-on-one conversation, book your paid consultation here. Blue Blaze said, not your keys, not your crypto. Doesn't matter if Caleb and Brown has fire blocks. They are too popular right now. Sounds like a link to, well, first off, Caleb and Brown has been around since 2016 and no problems of any sort. The second thing is, yeah, I've already kind of gone over, like, yeah, you have places where you buy, you have places where you sell, you have places where you store, and you spread it all out, you know, you spread it all out. That's how I look at it, at least personally. Juru said, you explain the current events so that it's easy to understand. My question is, can you pay in different currencies on Caleb and Brown or in USD only? I'm actually not sure. That's a good question for Jim. I would send him an email. His email is at the very top of the description. Shoot him a quick email and he'll get back to you about that. Juru22. Let's see. All right, guys. I think those are the major questions. I'll do my regular spiel for you guys because I have been working on this project for quite some time, and it's been by far one of the most fun things that I have ever done. And it's growing. And if you haven't already, you got to subscribe to my live show that I do with Ben Levitt. It's called Memes and Markets. We go live every Tuesday and Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. And the link you can find at the description. You can go ahead and subscribe. On here, we talk about where culture, tech, and financial markets all intersect. This week, we had on a really cool guest that I've watched for quite some time. They're called the Wall Street Skinny. A couple of ladies who spent some time on Wall Street, and they always have really interesting thoughts and breaking down like what's happening in real time. So this is a really good conversation that we had with them. And in general, we've had some very interesting guests over the past couple of weeks. We also had Ari Gutman, who's like a popular dividend investing YouTube channel. He's also turned more into growth investing now. And we actually ended up having a really cool conversation that was much more about like, you know, how to make your life better, essentially. And that was really cool because we go into these conversations and we kind of just are having a combo. And then we'll have a title and a thumbnail, but then eventually we'll get to where we're just talking. And then this one, we had no idea that it was going to transform into that kind of a conversation. We thought we were going to talk about investing and how to get rich with dividends, but that is not exactly how it went down. We just had this really cool conversation about like things that keep people stuck and how to power through and get to that next level in your life. So that was a really good one. We did a full episode breaking down Professor Zhang and whether or not he's an intelligent asset. So everyone who's interested in that, definitely been a big topic of conversation today. Check out Memes and Markets. It was a really fun episode. It was a really good episode. We talked about all of that. So yeah, that's what's going on over there. We've been growing pretty well. It's been a lot of fun. And I had someone over there comment, they finally came over and watched and they liked it. And I'm like, what took so long? Come through. So other than that, as I've mentioned a couple of times already, I just launched this partnership with Caleb and Brown. You can set up a free account with them. You can check the link in the description and or send an email to Jim if you're interested in buying or selling cryptocurrency. Um, yes, they are secured by Fireblocks. Someone brought that up. So great security in place. They've had no incidents, no limits on deposits or withdrawals. I think that's the most important thing here. I'm just going to be honest, that and being able to actually talk to someone about your decisions and understanding what's actually going on, because I won't be able to talk to everybody, unfortunately. And I have to pay consultations for anything that you guys want to cover there. But anyways, yeah, totally set up that free account with Caleb and Brown. I put the link to that in the description of this video. It'll also be in the pinned comments after this is all said and done. I'm also going to put it here in the actual live chat box. And then let's see if there's any final questions that you guys have. Have I heard of the crypto Kaleo? No, I have not. Christine said, thank you. Christine Cubillo, thank you for doing this. You explain these topics really well. Much appreciated. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. All right. MJan Tat said, I don't know, credentials matter in an age of misinformation. Well, I'll put it super bluntly. I've had people reach out to me with a similar, like I've had multiple people reach out to me like, oh, like, can you tell me like what your credentials are? Cause I'm trying to like share this with somebody and I don't know if I should do it or not, or they won't listen unless they know that you have credentials and this and that. And like, I think I don't get it. But I guess this is because my whole life has just been predicated upon the exact opposite. Like I live my life with the exact opposite type of an attitude. Your credentials do not mean that your motivations are pure, right? So I've gone to a university where I've had professors that had the highest utmost credentials in the world. Does that mean that their opinions are not tainted? Does that mean that the way that they think is not completely wrong? Like, no, it doesn't. It just means that this person has gone through the process. The question is, how are you earning your credentials? What are credentials? I think the credentials that you're talking about are credentials of someone else accrediting their information. And not even just that, but they've gone through a process. Like, so what? That doesn't mean that your opinions mean anything just because you've gone through a process of being indoctrinated in a certain way. I mean, like, let's say I wanted to learn about peace and living a happy life. And so I go to the monk who spent all of his time just learning about the ways of Buddhism. And his entire life has been predicated upon that. But he hates his life. Am I going to ask him about how to live a happy, fulfilling life? No, I'm not. I'm going to listen to the guy who's maybe never done anything like that, but is so thrilled with his life. Like Ari Gutman on our podcast. Super, super, not fake happy, really, truly satisfied, happy kind of a guy. I'm going to go and talk to him and listen to what he's got to say about that. I don't care about the monk who hates his life. So, it really always comes down to like someone said, like using discernment. It's like, I don't know if, your credentials mean that you win or that you know, right? It's just much more about who are you as a person? What might your actual motivations be? I think that's the thing to question with Professor Chang, not what his credentials are. You see what I'm saying? Like you've missed the whole plot if you're worried about his credentials and not about what his motivations might be. whether or not he's a CCP agent. That's 10 times more important than what his credentials are. Credentials can also be faked. There are plenty of people out there who are walking around with completely faked credentials because they are agents, because there are people who allow them and back them in doing that. So the real question is, what are the motivations behind what the people are saying? I mean, how many people that have had credentials have deceived hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people? I mean, you could say that a lot of people would say, look at the president of the United States right now. That's the highest level of credential you could possibly have. Everyone voted him in. Does that mean that his opinions and his ideas are infallible? No, it does not mean that. And it doesn't mean that also the things that he's saying are credible. We know that that's not the case, right? So come on, bro. I'll go on and on about something like that because it's a big part of my thesis that your credentials only matter as far as you and your ideas do. As far as your ideas matter, not as far like it. We already went through having the highest official in the United States as far as I won't even talk about it, but you guys know what I'm talking about. We've had a public health crisis, right? Where we've literally been shown that the intentions behind what was occurring there mattered more than anything. But anyways, let me move on. Yeah, I'm like, don't listen to me because I'm a guy talking to a stick. Yeah, Majantas, and I'm not like over upset. I'm upset with you or anything like that. It's just me trying to outline that idea because I do think it matters. Christina Cubillo, totally agree. Some of the best software developers I work with do not have a college degree. That's also a really good example, right? Capability versus credentials. Like, a developer is a really good example because there are huge levels of certifications and accreditations that you can get as a developer. Or for instance, especially in like the cybersecurity space, there's like crazy tests that you can take. Once you pass the test and you get the credential, when you're now going back out into the world and you're practicing cybersecurity, does that mean that everything that was on that test is going to actually be something that you use? You might know, you might be capable, but is that what you're doing? Maybe not. Meanwhile, the guy who never took the cert is just doing it all the time. He's always just actually practicing the highest levels of security on the planet. There's a difference between a sufficient and necessary. How do you say that? There's a difference between sufficiency and necessity. Sufficiency is this idea that having something, having your credential makes it possible for you to be telling the truth versus having the credential necessitates that you're telling the truth. And that's just not how the world works. Credentials are a sufficient but not a necessary clause. And I think that's how I want to end. I appreciate you guys, all of you. And I appreciate those kinds of discussions more than anything. So it's really cool that you guys are sticking around for any of that. Because like this is the kind of stuff that we also talk about much more on Memes and Markets, right? Because this channel, like I got to talk about like money and economics and stuff like that for people to really care. But like the world that we're living in requires these types of conversations as well. Because we have these decentralized forms of media where anyone can say anything. And because of that, we need to know we want to know whether or not that information that we're getting is good, or if it's trustworthy and whatnot. And we need to start to develop new ways to think about what that actually means, right? Like that becomes the thing that we have to do. We have to think more critically than we've ever had to in the past. Ben Levitt over at Memes and Markets, he talks about this all the time. We used to have a time where we just had like the radio and TV, and whatever 3 channels and 3 voices were on those places were the only things that you had. You didn't have to think. You weren't able to think. You just got what was there. And if you wanted to find the real truth, you had to go and read a book. You had to go and find an encyclopedia, and you needed to find the exact information about the thing that it was that you were being talked to about. Nowadays, that has completely flipped. There are unlimited channels to listen to, unlimited ways to get information. And now we have to be the ones to come together and figure out what is actually worth listening to. We have to figure out the systems to develop to actually think more critically about the incentives and the motives of the people that we're talking to or listening to. So I highly recommend you join us over at Memes and Markets. I think people get confused about what the memes means. Memes is not meme coins. Memes is memetics. It's society. It's what are the things that are happening throughout culture that are becoming these pervasive conversations that need to be had. And that's the beauty of Ben and I coming together. He spent years in social media. He spent years getting people to click on things. He spent years tapping into the psychology of these social media users, where things have gone wrong, where things have gone right. And here I am talking just a little bit of what I can talk about regarding the markets. And it's just this really fun duo that I think is, with Ben's expertise at the minimum, it makes it a really unique space to think about the world that we're living in and what's changing. It's not just about crypto. Okay. It becomes an underlying thing because all of us here think about that stuff, right? Anyone who's into crypto, we think about systems. We think about how all of these things work together. That's why we're here. But we also have all of those other conversations as well. But anyways, guys, happy Saturday. To leave it on a happy note, thanks for all of this. Super, super grateful for this journey, for you guys being with me on it. And I will certainly continue to do my best to provide what I can as we continue to do this. And appreciate you guys. And until next time.